Welcome back to Mayo Clinic Radio. I'm Dr. Tom Shives.
And I'm Tracy McCrae.
Filmmaker Ken Burns has been making documentaries for almost 40 years. His films include the Civil War, baseball, Lewis and Clark, the National Parks, America's Best Idea, and most recently, the Vietnam War. His films have won 15 Emmy Awards and 2 Oscar nominations. In September 2008, he was honored by the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences with a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, no kidding.
Now Burns is tackling a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. This fall, his latest documentary, The Mayo Clinic, Faith, Hope, and Science, will air nationwide on PBS stations September 25th and 26th. We are honored to have Ken Burns in studio today to discuss his latest project. Welcome to the program. It's a thrill to meet you.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Ken Burns, it is great to have you on the show. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. I know you've got a busy day, but we're all interested in knowing why you decided to do a documentary on our beloved institution, the Mayo Clinic.
So I've been making films for 40 years, and they've all been about us, the U.S., us. What makes the United States tick. And sometimes there are events like the Civil War, the most important event in American history, I believe. Sometimes they're about seminal people in our lifetime, Thomas Jefferson, Mark Twain, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lewis and Clark. Sometimes they're about institutions like baseball. I was drawn to the Mayo Clinic story, history, as a quintessential American subject in which to not answer, but to further ask, deepen the question of who are we and what kind of people. There's something happened here in the late 19th century that created what is arguably, and I'd be happy to argue, the greatest medical center on earth. And I was curious about how that took place, and the more I learned about how it took place, the more interesting and improbable and kind of utterly American it was in lots of ways that we don't kind of often consider. And so it's just been a delight, and I tell you, this is as the Mayo Clinic is collaborative, so is this. So as you're thanking me or saying nice things about me, this is a collaborative effort of Christopher Ewers and Eric Ewers and Julie Kaufman, a writer David Blistein, and a whole bunch of people that worked very hard for the last few years to try to make this film.
We think it's a pretty great place, too.
And Dr. Shives is an orthopedic surgeon, so this is just his nighttime. He just kind of moonlights. Well, what is it that you found most intriguing? You said as time went by, you found things that surprised you.
I think it'll surprise everybody. Just how the fortuitous founding of it between the Sisters of St. Francis and W.W. Mayo, the way in which certain decisions were made to put the patient first. It sort of seems obvious, but is not, in fact, the case in most of the healthcare that takes place in this country, to keep the records the same, to be a nonprofit institution. Medicine's now a big profit business, to be about education and research, about collaboration, to be on salary. The surgeons and the physicians are on salary here. That means there's no unnecessary tests. You're not enriched by ordering things. It fosters collaboration between people. All of these things, all keeping in mind a kind of larger ethical dimension about character and values that emanates both from W.W. Mayo and his sons, Will and Charlie, but also from the Sisters of St. Francis. That's still here, that's still palpable, and is part of the tradition. So there's a secret sauce here, and I don't think the recipe's written down anywhere. It's just they keep making it over and over again, and I felt privileged enough just to be able to get caught up in the Mayo's whirlwind for a few years. Was there
anything in particular that you learned while you were making this documentary that really surprised you? I didn't realize they did that, or I didn't know that about the institution?
Just about everything. I mean,
really?
We don't start off to tell people what we already know. That, the last time I checked, is homework. So we're in the business of sharing with our audience a process of our discovery. So I don't know what isn't, doctor, something that just at one point in the process just flabbergasted me. And then stuff happens. If somebody says it's not the notes in music, it's the intervals between the notes. So sometimes just seeing a scene again and seeing the expression on a face or the swallow that shows a bit of anxiety on the part of a patient or a doctor concerned. We have one doctor who comes very close to tears thinking about a patient that he had lost. And all of that together says something.
Pretty incredible the way the institution has grown. I mean, you followed it from the very beginning, and now 64,000 employees, 3 different institutions around the country. It's pretty incredible, isn't it?
It's incredible that the vision from the beginning is still intact, that it's able to do. There's nothing that I know of that would suggest that you could take a father and his 2 young sons and have a practice and sort of believe in some certain things that are going against the grain and on the edge of the frontier in the 19th century, and that 150 years later, it's still the model for what really works. Now, has it changed and grown? Of course it has, and it's had to understand realities of a modern world. But at its heart, the values are still essentially there, and you can feel it. You can feel the ghosts of Will and Charlie here as you walk the halls, and people talk about them. The doctors know the histories. The doctors talk about the stories that the nuns have told them. The nuns talk about the teachers, the mentors that they had, the nuns that were their teachers. The nurses are trying to be as much like the nuns as they, and so all of a sudden you go, what's going on here? It's not just committing medicine. It's creating some new way of doing it, and it's been working.
Everybody's drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Well, that's what's funny about it. We grew up in the Midwest, both Dr. Shives and I did. A lot of the professionals who work here come from all around the world. We like to talk, if you twist our arm, about how great we think Mayo Clinic is. When we first heard that you were doing this film, there was a lot of us that said, we just can't believe that he's interested. We can't believe we're worthy. I'm not quite sure where it came from.
I don't know why you wouldn't think that the Mayo Clinic, which would arguably be, it's like saying Babe Ruth or the Beatles or, George Washington. Well, at the top of a list, there are obviously great hospitals throughout the United States and the world, but you'd be hard-pressed to point out something that was better. So I don't know why. Maybe it's just the Midwestern modesty or insecurity. I don't know what it was. I grew up in the Midwest, too, in Michigan.
Yeah, Ann Arbor.
In Ann Arbor. And so I just think it's here. And look, this is not, I didn't make a film for the Mayo Clinic. I made a film of the Mayo Clinic. And it is also critical. And I don't mean there's stuff that's, bad stuff, but it's not a Valentine, so it's not a wet kiss. We're just trying to say, look, this is what happened, and it's interesting. And this person, it's ironic the way W.W. died, which you'll see in the film. It's interesting why, Will and Charlie had to stop performing surgeries. And, it's the story of how it was born in the tornado, out of tragedy, as so many things. Some destruction often plants the seeds for a new thing to be born.
Possibly because healthcare in this country is a pretty important conversation that needs to be had. That's what makes it more interesting to do to cover Mayo Clinic's version of healthcare.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And the problem is we should be having a conversation, and we're not. We are sidetracked by very simple, superficial politics that don't permit us to really have a conversation about what we owe each other. How do we take care of each other? What is the richest country in the world owe its fellow citizens in terms of stuff? And we're pathetic compared to the rest of the developed world in how we treat people. And sitting right in front of us is a really, really good example of how it might work. And it has all of these different ingredients, but it's sort of like if you know the best chef who makes this best pie, you can get the recipe and you can do it, and it will never be as good as that great chef. So you just say, let me just have that person make that pie for me. And I think this is what Mayo, and what I'm hoping the film will do is to restart this distracted, superficial conversation that we've been having about healthcare, meaning because you're for it, I'm against it, or because she's subscribes to this, I'm going to be the exact opposite, and say, well, wow, this actually works. Is there a model? Is there a template that can go beyond partisan politics and say, we all are going to get sick. We are all going to eventually die. We are all going to be caught up in a healthcare system. And it doesn't matter what sex you are, what race you are, how rich you are, it's all going to happen. Wouldn't it be great to have available to all of us at all times the best possible care? That would seem to be the continuation of democratic ideals that I think were permitted the Mayos to actually create the thing that they've created.
Ken Burns, talking about the upcoming Mayo Clinic documentary, Faith, Hope, and Science. So good to have you with us. You're famous for all of the documentaries that you've done. We are really privileged to have you with us, and we look forward to seeing this in September.
I can't wait for you to see the film in September. I think, if you're worried about your place in the world, I don't think you will after this, because it's really I hope a remarkable reflection of what the Mayo Clinic does so beautifully.
Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.